Hi and welcome to another Valentia Photography Workshops tutorial with me, Stephen Power. In this one I'm going to show you how to really boost the tones and the colours in your photographs very quickly, often in under 10 seconds, using Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom Classic. Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you how to change the tones and the colours in your photograph and give the image an additional boost and make it look very vibrant, all in 10 seconds. I'll show you how it's done in Adobe Lightroom later, but for now I'm using Adobe Photoshop and I'm going to use the levels slider, the levels tool. So to get to that, I go into Image, Adjustments, Levels, and there's the Levels tool. We can also use Control and L on the keyboard, and that brings up the tool. Now, what this tool will show you is basically a histogram of the tones in the image. On the left hand side we have this area where the dark tones are, and there's a dark slider to control that, and on this side we have the white tones or the light tones on the far right hand side, and a white slider in Photoshop to control that, and in the middle we have the mid tones or the grey tones, and there's a grey slider there to control that. What we're really interested in is that the histogram will start in this bottom left hand corner and finish in this bottom right hand corner, and that shows that we've got a good range of tones across the image. Now what we can see here is that there's a gap between the bottom right hand corner and the start of the tones, and because this right hand side is the area where the light tones are, it tells us that the image is lacking in light tones or white tones, bright tones, whatever you want to say. It's slightly darker than it should be, and so we're going to fix this image in less than 10 seconds. Bang, it's done. That was probably, I don't know, a second and a half maybe. All I did was move the white slider to where the tone started, and that's corrected the fact that there weren't enough whites in the image, and so this is now the start and finish of the histogram curve. We can modify that if we want, and we don't have to necessarily leave it at the beginning, and sometimes it won't work that well depending on what the tones are in the image. So that looks about right, and that one's done. This next image is quite similar, so Control L again to bring up the levels slider, and again we can see that it's slightly underexposed. The white tones are lacking, and so we can just bring up the slider. This is slightly more tricky because there's quite a lot of white tones in this image, so we might not want to go too far or we'll overexpose them. So again, just a question of bringing the slider up, and it's done. Now there might be other things to do to all of these images, but this is the first adjustment I make when I'm using Photoshop or Lightroom. Get those tones right, and then you can see what else might need to be done. Okay, so that one's done. The next one, this is actually a little bit more tricky because it looks here as if it's slightly lacking in the dark tones, and if we bring that up, it really it brings the skin tones a little bit too dark. So here's a situation where you have to use your eye a bit. And I'm going to move the white slider up, and that's bringing the background out and lifting the skin tones. So I'm just doing that by eye this time. So we can see this, we've got this parabolic curve and it joins this other set of curves here. And interestingly, it's just about right there in that little valley where they join. So that's kind of using it by eye. It took slightly longer, 5 seconds, maybe 6, but not long. When you get used to it, you can do this really quickly, and it's a really good starting point to adjust your images if they need it adjusting further. And often they don't. Often you don't need to use vibrance or anything like that, or clarity. This can be enough. Okay, so that's done. And the last one, now this is quite tricky. The image is overexposed, it's too bright, and often overexposure is one of the most difficult things to adjust in photography. It means that the tones are often not there anymore. With underexposure, at least up to about 3 stops under, the tones are still there in the image and you can bring them out. You might get a bit of noise in the finished image, but you can at least bring the tones out. With overexposed images, it's not always possible because the tone is gone, if you like. It's gone too bright. So here it's showing there's a flat line on the dark sides of the histogram, and I'm going to move that down slightly. If we go too far now, we're going to make it slightly oversaturated and too much, so bring it down a little bit. And then unusually I'll move the grey slider, mid-tone slider, down as well, just to bring those down a little bit more. This image would need to be adjusted further. I've got another video on how to adjust this image further using Lightroom, so do look out for that one. Okay, now, so very quickly we'll just go into Lightroom and back to the first image I showed you. And just to show you what I do there, it's the same principle. So we need the histogram in the develop module. So we find the histogram and then we move the cursor. It'll become this sort of double-headed arrow, if you like, along the histogram. If we start, you can see blacks, shadows, exposure, midtones really, the highlights and the whites. And so we'll leave the cursor in that whites area and just pull it. This time we have to pull the cursor rather than moving the slider. And we just pull the cursor until it's close enough to the end of the graph, if you like. Again, not too much. And we might just pull the highlights down a bit just to soften that a bit. But basically it's the same principle. So I hope you found that helpful. Please click the subscribe button if you'd like to. Keep in touch for more videos, and I'll see you soon.